Lorenzen Wright made headlines as the 7th overall pick in the 1996 NBA draft. He played for his hometown Memphis Grizzlies and had a huge impact on that community. But in 2010, he mysteriously disappeared. Police found his body 10 days later. The case went cold for 7 years until new evidence led Memphis police to make 2 arrests.
Lorenzen Wright's mother runs toward investigating.
Police in Memphis, Tennessee have found the body of former...
The police found Wright's body near a backwoods road some 20 miles outside of Memphis. He was shot 5 times.
In the early hours of July 19, 2010, a call came into 911 from Lorenzen Wright's cell phone. But this was not a calm call. The line opened, and then gunfire cut through it.
911, where's your emergency?
I have nothing but gunshots.
That was the sound connected to the final moments of a former NBA player, a father, a son, and one of Memphis' own. Before the police found him, before the city knew where he was, before his mother's fear became the truth, Lorenzen Wright had already reached for help. And no help reached him in time. By then, his family was already searching for answers. His mother, Deborah Marion, was trying to get to her son. His oldest daughter was calling him again and again. Lorenzen was supposed to be around family. He was expected. He was loved. And suddenly there was silence. That silence did not feel normal. It felt wrong. And when Deborah spoke with Sherra Wright, Lorenzen's ex-wife, what she heard only made the fear heavier. Sherra did not report him missing. According to what later came out in court records, Deborah remembered Sherra saying the police better do their job. That sentence stayed there like a warning. Because this was not the disappearance of a man who simply walked away from his life. This was not just another missing person case that faded into confusion. Years later, a courtroom would connect this murder to betrayal close to Lorenzen's own circle, including Sherra Wright and Billy Ray Turner. And that is where this case becomes almost unbearable. Because Lorenzen Wright was not taken by a stranger in some unknown place. He returned to Memphis, the city that once celebrated him, and days later, his body was found in a field near Hacks Cross and Winchester. He had been shot multiple times. He was only 34 years old. But the worst part is this. The truth did not come quickly. For years, his mother waited. His children waited. Memphis waited. Then, in 2017, a firearm pulled from a lake near Walnut, Mississippi, changed the direction of the case. In this episode, we are walking through the 911 call, the missing days, the discovery, the years of silence, Sherra Wright's guilty plea, Billy Ray Turner's conviction, and the mother who refused to let her son's name disappear. Before we continue, tell me where you are watching from, and stay with me until the end, because this case is not just about murder. It is about family, money, betrayal, and a truth that took 7 years to finally reach the courtroom. If you're into real, in-depth true crime stories, make sure you subscribe to Dark Trace Crime Stories. Because this case is one you won't forget.
Before he was murdered in 2010, Lorenzen Wright was an NBA star and hometown hero in Memphis, Tennessee. 8 years later, new evidence in the case and 2 arrests have stunned the city.
At nearly 7 feet tall, Lorenzen Wright was a giant in his hometown. First as a local high school star, then at the University of Memphis, and finally in the NBA with the Memphis Grizzlies.
Lorenzen was the hometown boy, makes good.
Former Memphis Police Director Tony Armstrong.
You can imagine with all of the lives that he had touched, not only here in this city, but all across the world, it was a phenomenal story.
But then, one night in July 2010, Wright suddenly went missing.
Lorenzen Verngagny Wright was born on November 4th, 1975, in Oxford, Mississippi, but Memphis became one of the places that shaped his name, his future, and his legacy. He was not a man people only knew from television. He was not just another tall athlete who passed through the city and moved on. Memphis watched him grow into something bigger. He attended Booker T. Washington High School in Memphis, and even then, basketball was already opening doors for him. At 6 feet 11 inches, Lorenzen had the kind of presence people noticed as soon as he entered a room. But his story was not only about height. It was about work, pressure, expectations, and a city that saw one of its own climbing toward a dream most young athletes never reach. Then came the University of Memphis Tigers. That was where Lorenzen became more than a promising player. He became a name people followed. He became part of the city's basketball memory. And in 1996, that promise turned into something permanent when the Los Angeles Clippers selected him 7th overall in the NBA draft. 7th overall. That was not luck. That was the result of years of discipline, years of attention, and years of carrying the hopes that came with being a standout player from Memphis. For 13 seasons, Lorenzen played in the NBA. He wore jerseys for the Los Angeles Clippers, Atlanta Hawks, Memphis Grizzlies, Sacramento Kings, and Cleveland Cavaliers. But in Memphis, the Grizzlies' years meant something different. When people saw him in that uniform, they were not just watching a professional athlete. They were watching someone tied to them, someone who represented home. And that is what makes the ending so painful. Because Lorenzen Wright was not only a basketball story. He was Deborah Marion's son. He was a father. He was a man whose family had already known deep loss before his own life was taken. In 1998, Lorenzen married Sherra Wright. Public accounts described them as having 7 children together, including their daughter, Sierra Simone Wright, who died as an infant in 2003. Court records later described Lorenzen and Sherra as having 6 children before their divorce in February 2010, reflecting the children still at the center of the family after that loss. That detail matters, because when Lorenzen disappeared, it was not just fans wondering where a former NBA player had gone. It was a mother trying to reach her son. It was children without answers. It was a family already carrying pain, now facing a silence that made no sense. Lorenzen had been celebrated in Memphis. He had been cheered there. He had played there. He had returned there. And in the end, it was Memphis that had to face the truth that one of its own had been taken. By 2010, the marriage between Lorenzen and Sherra Wright was over. Their divorce was finalized in February of that year. And from the outside, it looked like another painful family separation after years together, children together, and grief that had already passed through the home. After the divorce, Lorenzen was living in the Atlanta area. Sherra remained connected to Memphis and to the children's lives there. And even though the marriage had ended, the family ties had not disappeared. There were still children. There were still visits. There were still reasons for Lorenzen to come back to Memphis. And in July 2010, that is exactly what happened. Lorenzen came back to Memphis. He was expected around family events, including his sister's baby shower. That detail matters because it tells us something important. Lorenzen was not supposed to vanish quietly. He was not a man nobody expected to hear from. He had people waiting for him. He had family looking for him. He had a mother who knew when something did not feel right. Then he did not show up. At first, it might have looked like a delay. A missed call. A change of plans. Something that could be explained later. But then the calls kept going unanswered. His mother, Deborah Marion, tried to reach him. His oldest daughter also tried calling him several times. And with each failed attempt, the fear grew heavier. Because there is a kind of silence families recognize. Not ordinary silence. Not busy silence. Not, I'll call you back later silence. This was different. This was the silence that makes a mother stop trusting every easy explanation. And Deborah did not sit still with that feeling. She contacted Sherra, trying to understand where Lorenzen was and why nobody seemed to have a clear answer. And that conversation became one of those moments that stayed with her. Not because it solved anything right away, but because it made the situation feel even more wrong. Deborah remembered Sherra saying that the police better do their job. Just listen to what that means in the middle of a missing person fear. A mother is trying to find her son. A daughter has been calling her father. Lorenzen has not shown up where he was expected. The family is worried. And Sherra did not report him missing. That response did not land like comfort. It landed like alarm. Now, at this point, we are not jumping ahead and pretending Deborah had courtroom evidence in her hand. She did not. She had a mother's fear. She had unanswered calls. She had a son who had gone silent. And she had a response from Sherra that did not settle her spirit. So Deborah acted. She contacted police and reported Lorenzen missing. Before we continue, I want to ask you this. If someone you loved suddenly stopped answering, missed family events, and the explanation from someone close to them did not feel right, what would you have done? Drop your answer in the comments, and tell me what state or country you are watching from, because cases like this make people think about their own families. For Deborah Marion, there was no waiting for the situation to fix itself. Her son was missing. The silence had become too heavy to ignore. And every hour without Lorenzen made the fear harder to push away. What makes this part of the story so painful is that the family did not yet know the full truth. They did not know that Lorenzen had already made one desperate call himself. They did not know that in the early hours of July 19th, 2010, a 911 call had come from his own cell phone. They did not know that the call had been interrupted by gunfire. So while Deborah was trying to get answers, while his daughter was trying to reach him, while the family was looking for the man they loved, the case had already crossed into something far worse than a missing person report. And soon, Memphis would learn just how far that silence had gone. A 911 call came from Lorenzen's cell phone. That detail alone changes the weight of the entire case. Because Lorenzen did not simply vanish into silence. Before his family found out how serious the situation was, before his mother pushed police to act, before his body was discovered, his own phone had already reached emergency services. But the call did not turn into a clear conversation. There was no complete statement that explained where he was. No full sentence that led help straight to him. No calm description of who was there or what had happened. Instead, the line was interrupted by gunfire. That is the part that stays with you. Because somewhere in those final moments, Lorenzen's phone connected to help, but the help never reached him in time. A call existed. A chance existed. A signal of danger existed. And still, by the time anyone understood what had happened, the damage had already been done. From that moment, the story splits into two painful realities. In one reality, Lorenzen's family was still looking for him. In the other, something terrible had already happened. Days passed, and every day made the fear harder to explain away. A former NBA player had disappeared, and this was not a man nobody would miss. Lorenzen Wright had a name people knew. He had ties across Memphis. He had children. He had a mother who was paying attention. He had a life that could not simply go quiet without somebody noticing. Memphis began to feel the weight of it too. This was not just a family searching privately anymore. The silence around Lorenzen became a public concern. A man who had played on the biggest basketball stage in the world was gone, and nobody had a clean answer. No one could point to him and say he was safe. No one could tell Deborah Marion that her son was coming home. And Deborah kept pushing. That is important in this case. She did not accept the silence. She did not allow Lorenzen's absence to be treated like something ordinary. She knew her son. She knew this was wrong. And when she did not get the answers she needed, she took action and reported him missing. But while the family was searching, the clock was already working against them. The days between July 19th and July 28th were filled with uncertainty. For Lorenzen's loved ones, every unanswered call carried another blow. Every hour without confirmation created more fear. There is a special kind of pain in not knowing. It keeps a family trapped between hope and dread. You want to believe the person will walk back in. You want to believe there is some explanation that will make sense. But deep down, the silence keeps telling you something else. Then July 28th came. The search ended in the worst possible way. Lorenzen Wright's body was found in a field near Hacks Cross and Winchester in Memphis. That sentence changed everything. Until that moment, there was still a thin line of hope. Painful hope. Desperate hope. But hope all the same. Once his body was found, the family no longer had to wonder if Lorenzen was missing. They had to face the truth that he had been killed. He had been shot multiple times. He was only 34 years old. 34. That is not an age where a father's story should end. That is not an age where children should be forced to grow up with memories instead of moments. That is not an age where a mother should have to stand in the middle of public grief, asking why her son was taken and why the answers did not come sooner. For Memphis, the discovery was a wound. This was the city that had watched Lorenzen rise. The city that knew him from high school basketball, college basketball, and his time with the Grizzlies. The same city that once saw him as proof that a local name could reach national heights, now had to process the reality that he had been found dead in a field. And there is no way to make that feel normal. A man who had once stood under bright arena lights, wearing NBA jerseys, playing in front of thousands, was now at the center of a murder investigation. Not because he disappeared from public life. Not because fame faded, but because someone took his life. By the time the city knew where Lorenzen was, his children had already lost their father. His mother's fear had already become reality. The phone calls that went unanswered had turned into evidence of a final silence nobody could repair. And still, even after his body was found, the truth did not arrive quickly. There was grief, but not justice. There was a crime scene, but not immediate closure. There was a 911 call, but no rescue. There was a mother demanding answers, but the case would not break open right away. That is what made the years after Lorenzen's death so painful. His family knew he had been killed. Memphis knew one of its own had been taken. But knowing he was gone was not the same as knowing who was responsible, how deep the betrayal went, and why it would take 7 years before the case finally moved toward the people later charged in court. For now, all his loved ones had was loss. A body found near Hacks Cross and Winchester. A 911 call cut off by gunfire. And the unbearable truth that Lorenzen Wright had reached toward help before anyone reached him.
Lorenzen Wright's mother runs toward investigating.
Police in Memphis, Tennessee have found the body of former...
The police found Wright's body near a backwoods road some 20 miles outside of Memphis. He was shot 5 times.
This was Lorenzen Wright. Who would be hating him that much?
As Memphis mourned, months turned into years, and the city became obsessed with solving the murder of its favorite son.
There was a lot of pressure to solve it because of who Lorenzen Wright was and what he meant to this city.
Then finally, 7 long years after the murder, in November 2017, police got a break. They found the murder weapon in a lake.
After Lorenzen Wright's body was found near Hacks Cross and Winchester, the pain did not end. In some ways, that was when another kind of suffering began. His family finally knew he was gone. Memphis finally knew that one of its own had been killed. The missing person fear had become a murder case. But knowing Lorenzen had been taken was not the same as knowing who did it, why it happened, or how a man so visible could vanish, make a 911 call, and still end up dead in a field. That is the part that sat over this case for years. There were questions everywhere, and the silence around them became heavier with time. People had suspicions. In a case like this, of course they did. Lorenzen was not a stranger to the city. He was a former NBA player. He had family ties, personal history, a divorce that had just been finalized months earlier, and children caught in the middle of all that pain. People talked. People wondered. People looked at the details and asked how this could happen. But suspicion is not justice. A mother cannot bury her son on suspicion. Children cannot get answers from rumors. A city cannot close its wounds with guesses. So the case stayed open. Year after year, Lorenzen's name remained attached to an unanswered question. His mother, Deborah Marion, kept pushing. She had been the one who refused to accept his silence as normal. She had been the one who reported him missing when the answers did not feel right. And even after his body was found, she still had to live with the worst kind of waiting. The kind where you know your child was killed, but the people responsible are still not fully held in court. That kind of weight changes a family. Every birthday comes with absence. Every holiday comes with a missing chair. Every time Lorenzen's children grew older, they had to grow inside the shadow of what happened to their father. And Memphis did not forget either. This was not a case that quietly disappeared from memory. Lorenzen Wright had worn the city's name on his back when he played for the Grizzlies. He had been part of Memphis basketball history. People remembered his size, his smile, his career, his connection to home. And now they remembered the field. They remembered the 911 call. They remembered that there had still been no complete courtroom closure. Then, in 2017, the case changed. Authorities located a firearm in a lake near Walnut, Mississippi. After years of silence, that discovery landed like a door opening. For 7 years, the case had lived in pain and uncertainty. Then suddenly, there was a physical piece of evidence that could move the investigation forward. A firearm pulled from a lake is not just an object in a case file. In a cold case like this, it can become the difference between questions that never stop and evidence that finally starts speaking in court. And from there, the story began moving in a direction Lorenzen's family had waited years to see.
How unusual is it to find a key piece of evidence some 7 years later?
They found a needle in the haystack.
But before we talk about the gun in the lake, we need to talk about the man who led investigators there. His name was Jimmy Martin. And he did not come into this story as a stranger. Jimmy Martin was connected to Sherra Wright's family. He was Sherra's cousin, which means his link to Lorenzen Wright came through the woman Lorenzen had once married. He was not introduced in court as Lorenzen's best friend. He was not presented as someone who simply heard a rumor from the outside. He was part of the family circle around Sherra, and according to prosecutors, he became part of the plan that later formed the center of the case. That is why his role is so important. Because when Martin eventually spoke, He was not giving police a distant opinion. He was giving them an insider's account. According to his testimony, Sherra Wright first asked him in May 2010 to help kill Lorenzen. Martin said there were meetings at Sherra's house where the killing was discussed. He said Billy Ray Turner was there too. Turner was the man prosecutors later described as Sherra's yardman, someone who knew her from church, and someone they said had a close personal relationship with her. So now the case had three names sitting inside the same story. Sherra Wright, Billy Ray Turner, Jimmy Martin. Martin testified that the conversations were not vague. He said they were talking about ways to carry out the killing. He described it as planning. He said one of the ideas was to kill Lorenzen at his condominium in the Atlanta area. That part is important because it shows the danger around Lorenzen did not begin in the field in Memphis. According to Martin, Sherra wanted him to go to Atlanta and kill Lorenzen there. He said there was an understanding that he would be paid. He also testified that Sherra gave him a car with guns, money, and marijuana in the trunk. But Martin said he did not actually go through with that first Atlanta plan. He told Sherra he went and could not find Lorenzen, but later admitted that he had not gone. According to Martin, Sherra knew he was lying and became upset. Then he said the plan moved forward again. This time, Martin said Sherra told him to return to Atlanta with Billy Ray Turner. According to his testimony, Sherra had recently been at Lorenzen's condominium and had left a window open. Martin said he and Turner went there armed, entered through that window at night, and found someone sleeping inside. But it was not Lorenzen, so they left. That failed attempt matters because it shows why Martin later became more than just another witness. He was placing himself inside the earlier part of the plan. He was admitting involvement. He was saying he knew about the attempt before the murder ever happened in Memphis. But Martin did not immediately become the public face of the case. For years, Lorenzen's murder remained open. Then Martin became important in another way. He was also dealing with his own criminal case. Martin was convicted in 2012 for killing his girlfriend and was serving a 20-year prison sentence. While his own life had already moved deep into the criminal justice system, he spoke to investigators about Lorenzen Wright's murder. And according to court testimony and reports, Martin told investigators where the murder weapon had been dumped. That is the piece that changed everything. Martin said that after Lorenzen was killed, he went with Turner to dispose of the gun. He said the weapon was taken to a lake in Mississippi and thrown into the water. That information gave investigators something solid to chase after years of dead ends. This is why the gun discovery should not be described like a random miracle. It was not found by accident. It was found because Martin gave investigators a location. Now, we also have to be honest about Martin's credibility. He was not a perfect witness. He was a convicted killer. He had his own criminal history. He had given statements with inconsistencies. The defense challenged him hard because of that. And he testified under an agreement that protected him from being prosecuted in the right case as long as he told the truth. So viewers should understand this clearly. Prosecutors did not ask the jury to believe Martin only because he said something. They pointed to other evidence that supported parts of his account. They had another witness who testified about meetings at Sherra's home. They had phone evidence. They had the financial details. They had Turner's connection to Sherra. They had the failed Georgia attempt. And most importantly, they had the gun Martin said was thrown into the lake. When FBI divers later recovered the firearm from the Mississippi lake, that gave investigators a physical piece of evidence tied to Martin's account. That is how Martin entered the case. He was Sherra Wright's cousin. He said he was part of the earlier plan. He later gave investigators the location of the gun. And once the weapon was recovered, the case that had been cold for years finally started moving toward Sherra Wright and Billy Ray Turner. For Lorenzen's family, this was painful in a different way. Because the break in the case did not come from someone far away. It came from inside the circle connected to the woman Lorenzen had once called his wife.
Weeks later, police arrested two people, a landscaper with a criminal past, and Lorenzen Wright's ex-wife and the mother of his 7 children.
Just the thought of it. Is this even real?
Earlier this year, Billy Ray Turner was charged and sentenced in the murder of Wright. Investigators say he was hired by Wright's ex Sherra to kill him back in 2010.
In December 2017, Billy Ray Turner and Sherra Wright were indicted. Sherra Wright, Lorenzen's ex-wife. The woman he had once married in 1998. The woman connected to the family life they had built. The woman whose name now stood beside Billy Ray Turner in an indictment tied to the killing of Lorenzen Wright. That is where the pain of this case becomes even harder to sit with. Because this was no longer only about a former athlete found dead after a mysterious 911 call. The case was now moving toward a claim of betrayal from close range. The courtroom would later hear about planning, money, phone records, witness testimony, and the connection between Sherra Wright and Billy Ray Turner. And money became part of the picture. Court records showed that Lorenzen had a $1 million life insurance policy. They also showed that his NBA pension was valued at about $150,000 at the time of his death. Those numbers matter because they helped shape the prosecution's theory. This was not presented as a killing with no context, no motive, and no structure. Prosecutors would point to financial interest, personal connection, and evidence linking people together around the plot that ended Lorenzen's life. But at this point in the story, the most important thing is the shift. For years, Deborah Marion had waited with pain and unanswered questions. Lorenzen's children had lived without their father and without full public accountability. Memphis had carried the memory of a man who reached for help through a 911 call, but was not saved. Then the lake discovery came. Then the indictments came. Then the silence finally started to break. After 7 years, Lorenzen Wright's case moved out of the space of rumor and grief and into the place his family had been demanding from the beginning. Evidence. Charges. Court. Sherra did not go to trial on the original murder charge. In July 2019, she pleaded guilty to facilitation of first-degree murder. She received a 30-year prison sentence. That plea mattered because it publicly confirmed her legal responsibility in the events that led to Lorenzen's death. Think about how heavy that is. This was the woman Lorenzen had married in 1998. The woman connected to the family he built. The mother of children tied to his life. And now, in court, her name was not just part of old family history. Her name was legally tied to the events that ended his life. There's no soft way to say that. For Lorenzen's family, that kind of betrayal cuts deeper than a stranger's violence. A stranger may take a life, but betrayal from someone once inside the family circle leaves a different kind of wound. It forces everyone left behind to look back at memories, conversations, visits, and family ties through the shadow of what later came out in court. But Sherra's plea was not the end of the legal road. Billy Ray Turner went to trial. And at that trial, the jury heard the evidence against him. They heard about the planning. They heard about the attempted attack in Georgia. They heard about the connection to Sherra Wright. They heard the case prosecutors had waited years to present. In March 2022, a Shelby County jury found Turner guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and attempted first-degree murder. After all those years, after the silence, after the late discovery, after the indictments, the jury reached its decision. Guilty. Not on one count. On all 3 of those major charges. Then, in July 2022, Judge Lee Coffey sentenced Turner to life in prison, plus additional time for the related convictions. The Shelby County District Attorney's Office described the total sentence as life plus 41 years, including a separate 16-year sentence from a weapons conviction. That sentence carried the weight of everything Lorenzen's family had waited to hear. It did not erase the 911 call. It did not remove the image of that field from the memory of Memphis. It did not give Deborah Marion back her son. But it meant the court had finally spoken. Turner appealed. But in October 2023, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the trial court's judgments. The court found the evidence sufficient to support the convictions and rejected Turner's arguments for relief. That matters because the verdict did not simply come and vanish into uncertainty. The appeal was heard, the arguments were reviewed, and the judgments were upheld. For Lorenzen's family, this was not quick justice. It was not clean justice. It was not painless justice. It took years. Years of waiting. Years of suspicion. Years of grief. Years where his children had to keep growing while the case still had not reached full accountability in court. And that is why the anger in this case is justified. Because Lorenzen Wright was not only killed. His family was left waiting for answers while the people later tied to the case continued living through years that he never got to see. The courtroom finally gave the public the structure of the case. The attempted attack in Georgia, the fatal attack in Memphis, the financial details, the witness testimony, the plea, the conviction, the sentence, and the failed appeal. But even with all of that, one truth remained heavier than every legal document. Lorenzen Wright should have been alive to raise his children. Instead, his name became a case file, His final call became evidence, and the people who loved him had to fight for years before the truth stood where everyone could finally see it.
So, imagine what's going through his head. He don't want to believe it, but some stuff you just got to follow evidence on.
With a mix of emotions, Deborah Marion reacted to Sherra Wright smiling at Marion's 23-year-old grandson, Lorenzen Wright Jr., in court Wednesday.
All I want all my grandkids to do is just follow the evidence. I don't want nobody sidebar telling them nothing.
In Sherra Wright's short court appearance, Judge Lee Coffey ordered a mental health evaluation to determine if she's fit to stand trial.
She's depressed. She's sad about this entire proceeding.
White Jr. declined comment leaving the courtroom, but his grandmother sent her love and support to him in this complicated family dynamic.
I don't try to pressure him into anything. Whatever he want to tell me, I let him tell me. Or whatever he don't want to tell me, I do that.
At the end of this case, it is easy for people to remember only the crime. The 911 call, the field near Hacks Cross and Winchester, the years without answers, the lake discovery, the guilty plea, the conviction. But Lorenzen Wright was more than the way his life ended. He was not born to become a murder case. He was not raised to become a headline people would revisit years later because of betrayal, court records, and prison sentences. Before all of that, Lorenzen was a son, a father, a Memphis basketball star, a man who carried a city's pride on his shoulders long before his name was attached to tragedy. And that is why this ending still hurts. Because Memphis did not just lose a former NBA player. Deborah Marion lost her son. Lorenzen's children lost their father. A family that had already carried the pain of losing baby Sierra was forced into another grief that stretched for years before the court finally delivered accountability. When Deborah kept pushing, she was not chasing attention. She was chasing the truth. She knew her son's silence was wrong. She knew Lorenzen had people waiting for him. She knew he was not supposed to disappear without explanation. And even when the case remained open for years, she did not let his name fade into the background. That fight matters, because when a mother has to keep saying her child's name until the world listens, that tells you how heavy the road to justice can become. This case showed something painful and undeniable. Fame did not protect him. Money did not protect him. Being loved by a city did not protect him. Lorenzen Wright had played in NBA arenas. He had worn the jerseys. He had represented Memphis. He had lived the kind of dream many people only imagine from a distance. But none of that saved him from betrayal close to home. And that is the part that stays with me. Not only that he died, but that the people who loved him had to fight through silence before the truth finally stood in court. So when we say his name, we should not say it only as part of a crime story. We should say it as the name of a father, a son, a Memphis star, a man whose life had meaning before the final chapter was written for him. If this story moved you, subscribe to Dark Trace Crime Stories, share this episode, and comment Lorenzen Wright's name below so his memory does not end with the courtroom record. Because here, we do not just cover the crime. We remember the life that was taken. This is Dark Trace Crime Stories.